I want to bring in retired Lieutenant General Richard Newton, now more than 30 years military experience, also former Assistant Vice Chief of Staff with the U.S. Air Force. Lieutenant General, your expertise are always so wonderful in these horrible times because it gives us perspective of the battle and what's going on with the fight right now. I want you to help us understand this issue with the Poland MiGs and kind of a bungled attempt to get these fighter jets into the hands of the U.S. and then into the hands of the Ukrainians. How did this really unravel, and what does it mean?
Well, good evening, Marnie. And again, you alluded to this earlier. It's again, we're here now 14 days later. You and I were on air when really the invasion unfolded. It was grim then and it's grim now. But specifically relating to the MiG-29 transfer, we had thought, the U.S. had thought, as well as the NATO allies, that the transfer would be direct from Poland to Ukraine. But they came in with, again, a blind side, I believe, certainly to the Pentagon and the Department of State of, again, asking to transfer those aircraft from Poland to Ramstein Air Base, which is a U.S. air base in Germany, and then to Ukraine. That would be, in my view, and certainly in the view of the administration, that would be, again, crossing a threshold where it would compel Putin to think that there is direct confrontation now with the United States because these aircraft would be transferred directly from Ramstein to Ukraine.
The other big concern here, General, the threat of biological and chemical warfare now from Russia. We're just getting that news tonight. What line does Vladimir Putin have to cross before this thing escalates and triggers a more severe response from the world?
Well, there's really no line for him to cross other than because this is in his playbook, Marnie. If he gets to a point where he is backed into a corner where he has no options, he will use the next chapter of that playbook, and that is with weapons of mass destruction. As you alluded, could be chemical, biological weapons, which would be an extraordinary debacle. Also for tactical nuclear weapons. He could demonstrate the use of a tactical nuclear weapon either against Ukraine forces or perhaps out in the Black Sea as a test. But nonetheless, this is in his playbook. This is part of Russian war doctrine to call in for these weapons of mass destruction.
How long can the Russian forces endure some of the conditions that we're seeing them face on the ground, right? They're stalled. They've been trying to get into Kyiv now for 2 weeks. They're running short on supplies. They're meeting heavy resistance from the Ukraine army and even the civilians there. How long can they keep doing that before they change their strategy?
That's a great question because we don't know, and I don't know if they know, frankly. The general officers who planned this invasion, as well as those who are carrying it out, have really have behind this invasion is really an inept logistics supply system that is not rearming and providing food and water, simple food and water to the Russian soldiers in the field. And so the unknown is how long can they last? I believe that they can't last very much longer. And oh, by the way, they've got 100% of their invasion forces already engaged in Ukraine. But for them to go now, they're trying to encircle Kiev and then try to go block to block in an urban warfare. I just don't see them being successful in that endeavor, especially with their supply chain issues they've got now.
Well, being an Air Force guy, I mean, how concerned are you that we have not seen the full force of the Russian military come to bear in terms of their capabilities in the sky?
Well, I flew with the Russian Air Force several years or so ago, and I can attest that they have a capable Air Force. I'm surprised at this point that they haven't really brought in their vulnerable, their venerable air capabilities, but that is still a very strong capability that they can unleash on Ukraine. They haven't seen that yet. One thing that's pulling them back a little bit is in terms of the weather and other the lacking of attack capabilities, as well as owning the airfields. And the Ukrainian Air Force has put up quite a fight. And so that's denying them the air as well.
And we see these civilian targets, this heartbreaking image on the screen now of this hospital. I mean, the tactics and the strategy by Putin and the Russian military right now to go after civilians. By the way, when a ceasefire is supposed to be underway, letting people escape safely. People are saying these are massive war crimes, and it cannot stand. It's hard to know what tomorrow brings when this is what happened today.
It does. And these are war crimes, Marty. It also shows that, frankly, the Russian military, with the supply chain issues they're having, but also the capability of the Russian forces on the ground in Ukraine, do not have what I would call the precision fires. So they're having to use blunt instruments of warfare, such as mortar fire, long-range artillery. But it's not, it is they'll go after civilian targets just to raise the ante and to put the scare into the Ukrainian people. But as Robert so eloquently put, it's really putting an iron rod behind the spines of the Ukrainian people, and they're resisting. That's what's going to make this a long and bloody fight.
Yeah, real quick before I let you go, the fight in Kyiv, there are some reports talk that it could fall in the next 24 hours. Who's to say at this point? But you have to believe that the Ukrainian forces and the civilians in Kyiv know it better than anybody else, that they're prepared. What's the strategy from those ground forces right now as the Russian troops do get closer?
Well, I don't believe it's going to fall in the next 24, 96 hours or whatever the timeline is. And, I've been wrong before. But again, I think the resistance that the Ukrainian, not only the Ukrainian military, but the Ukrainian partisans now and the civilians. And by the way, President Zelensky, again, his iron will as president, I think is remarkable. And I think that will embolden the Ukrainian military forces on the ground. I think it'll be very difficult for the Russians, especially they've been in the field now for 14 straight days. And for them now to go block to block, I think it's going to be very difficult. Now, that said, I'll close on this point, is that will compel Putin and the Russian army leaders on the ground to go in with more blunt instruments of power. And that's where civilians will get in the way, and it's going to get to be a bloody mess once that attack on Kyiv begins.
Right. And just one point that you said to me last week when we were talking, to put this all in perspective, in Afghanistan, it took the U.S. military, 26 days to try to take Baghdad. When you're looking at, we're 2 weeks into this battle with the Ukrainian army able to hold off this. We've got a long road ahead. Thanks for watching. Click the red subscribe button below so you can get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.